Keep yourself in the loop of everything football on the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. The latest news on and off the field, be it college football, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC to the NFL. We've got you covered. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
Welcome to the GSMC Football Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. It is the dynamic duo of hosts here on the GSMC. On the football side of things, it's Ethan and Brice. It's been a tough week to be an American citizen, all things considered. Brice, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, man. Yeah, man, it's been a crazy week, crazy few days, crazy weekend. You know, man, just crazy time, like you said, man. But, you know, that's why we're here. We're going to try to talk about football, so everybody listening, so we can attempt to take their minds off of it, even though, you know, obviously it will come up in our talk probably today, but you know how it is.
Yeah, man. So what we're going to be starting our conversation off today with is about the Cleveland Browns. Yes, the Cleveland Browns are starting off this podcast because they are once again coming back up in conversation. As we all know, their stint with Freddie Kitchens did not pan out well. 1 year gone, the next. And now, with a new offensive coordinator, it only can look like there's only but up, right? You would think so. But they are trying to build up what they believe upon is something that they see in Baker Mayfield, their the quarterback in his third year, on what he'll be able to do in rebound. So their new head coach, Kevin Stefanski, believes that using play action passes, which is apparently something that Mayfield is really good at, can help him. So he says, I think it matches up very nicely with being in control, getting checks in the run game, and being efficient. Mayfield told reporters Thursday via team transcript on how he messaged with Stefanski's offense, and he said, last year, I know it was not a great year for turnovers, but I always prided myself on not turning the ball over. That is something in the conversations that we've had and where we do take our shots. It has to be smart decisions, and there is nothing wrong with throwing an incompletion every once in a while. Scheme-wise, he thinks his skill set matches up to be very well with the coach, and also he thinks that he's going to be a great fit. So Baker Mayfield had 21 interceptions last year, and it was the most among the AFC and second in the NFL, and 9 of his 22 touchdowns were on play action passes, though that was tied for third in the league per next gen statistics. So also, side note, Baker Mayfield's passer rating was 36.8 points better on pass attempts involving play action. So I already have a few thoughts about this in particular on why play action might be the realm of success. But if you feel like you have something to go with right now, let me hear it.
I mean, if you honestly think about it in just the general scheme of things, in most offenses or in most offenses in general, everybody knows play action is probably the one part of your game that should be the most efficient when it comes to the passing game, because of obviously it's supposed to confuse the defense, make people jump and create opportunities usually over the top. And so with Cleveland, you have to think about it. They still do have one of the best running back duos in Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb. And if the Browns can establish a running game this year, you already said it, that his passer rating is much improved off play action than just off a normal drop back. If they can keep that formula up, which is the traditional formula, run and then do play action, of course I expect Baker to be able to make some big plays over the top to Odell and Jarvis Landry. and Cleveland's offense to really explode this year if they're able to execute that and do it efficiently. Because, obviously, this is, like I said, we both know this is a breaker. For the most part, people think it's a make or break year for Baker Mayfield. He has to play well this season because even though, he is the starting quarterback right now, this regime did not draft him. So he has to prove himself to them or else he'll probably be out the door. But if they could definitely get it on track this year offensively and he cuts the turnovers down by half, I think Baker will be in for a very, very good year.
Yeah, and I think that it all really does tie down to Nick Chubb, and I'm glad you mentioned it. Nick Chubb is what made that offense engine basically start up all last season, and Freddie Kitchens would sometimes stall it out, and we would see Nick Chubb really be the best player on the field at times. And it would be like, why don't you give him more touches? Why don't you give him the ball on the goal line? Why won't you do this, that, and the third with Nick Chubb? Nick Chubb makes everything else work. He makes it better. People have to pay attention to him. It's just like in Dallas, right? Dak Prescott has definitely improved as a quarterback. But when he first came on the scene, he was still raw as a prospect, and he was not the best option for quarterbacks out there. But what always held Dak Prescott down as far as being grounded and be able to stick within the program was that he had a tremendous offensive line. But two, he has a top 5 running back getting the ball from him all the time. And the Dallas is not shy of giving, Ezekiel Elliott 30 touches a game, right? That can happen. It's happened before. And I believe Cleveland has to see that even though you have Odell, even though you have now from the Falcons a really, really stud tight end, even though you have Jarvis Landry, even though you already have another tight end in Njoku, you got to start feeding the hot hand, the guy who's really about it. Because Nick Chubb is really a talent that you don't get too much in the NFL, and he looks to be a guy that is not just a 2-down back, but a guy who can catch up the backfield, a guy who can make things happen in space, a guy who can pick up extra yardage, a real workhorse, and that's rare to come by in the NFL these days since everybody runs by committee. Not to say that they won't, but establishing the run and being committed to the run are two different things, and I think Cleveland has to be committed to the run game in order to find success with Baker Mayfield.
Yeah, definitely. And on top of that too, you gotta think too. You made the example with Dak. One thing that also helped Dallas have a great year that year, rookie especially, while he was developing as a passer, was the fact they had such a great running back with Ezekiel Elliott, and just the fact that it's like I said, it's just been shown when you have the consistent running game, and we know how good Nick Chubb is. He was leading the league in rushing until they literally stopped running the ball with him at the end of the season. He would have won the rushing title. So you basically have a rushing title champion in your backfield, even though he never officially got it. And then you got, like I said, you got big play guys. You got Njoku, Austin Hooper, Jarvis Landry, Odell. This offense on paper should be one of the best offenses in the league. And like I said, Kevin Stefanski is here to put it all together. We have to commend him for what he did in Minnesota. He knew he had to run the ball with Dalvin Cook. He had 2 number 1 receivers. Listen, we can say what you say about Kirk Cousins, but they were good enough, and they would make it to the playoffs consistently. And if he can do that here for Cleveland and help, if he can get a Kirk Cousins-led team with that type of talent to the playoffs, I think he can do the same thing in Cleveland.
Right, and I think they have more talent around here in Cleveland from quarterback down. So in reality, this should be, I wouldn't say a walk in the park. They're in arguably a tougher division. As you know, playing in Minnesota, you really only had to worry about Green Bay because Detroit really wasn't going anywhere, and Chicago hasn't had a decent quarterback really since what? Since the what's his name?
Some people would say Jay Cutler, but before that,
I'm about to say Jay Cutler was pretty decent in his heyday.
Where would you put Rex Grossman? He did get him to the Super Bowl.
We saw the tail ends of Rex Grossman and what that meant. So that's all we have to say on that matter, huh? But yeah, we see what he was able to do in the situation he was in. Granted, it's a much tougher defensive-oriented playing field he's playing in at the moment in time. I mean, of course, there still is the Bengals, which we will talk about real soon. You can't assume that they're going to be any worse than they were last year. And sometimes we can admit, they didn't try as hard as they could have tried last year because they were trying to get into a high pick. So we'll see. There's just no way to not assume that they will improve over there. So the AFC North is one of the toughest divisions in football, one of the most historic rivalry divisions in football. It's not going to be easy. However, I would assume that the offense would look a lot better than it will be last year, or what it did last year. But we're going to take our first official break here, and we're going to come back talking about the Baltimore Ravens, another one of those AFC North teams. It's an AFC North mini pod coming right up.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Okay, so we're coming back in. We're still on the AFC North. We just recently finished talking about Cleveland and their potential offensive success plan that could be in the works for them to have a much better performance this year than they did the year prior. And it all starts with Steven Stefanski's offense and everything around Baker Mayfield and being comfortable running the football. Now, speaking of running the football, we're talking about the Ravens. Baltimore is set to be another one of those favorites coming out of the AFC. And, of course, their head coach, Mr. Harbaugh, Mr. Johnny H., is saying that last season they got out the gates running and they were basically floating around under the radar. No one really expected Lamar Jackson to take such a leap. No one expected their really, really unique style of offensive play calling and using different weapons to be as effective as it was, and just the overall speed and athleticism on that team. No one expected the Ravens to do what they did all season. It was a joy to watch, and it was a joy to see in the NFL something a little bit, unorthodox, really working out for the best of all our entertainment on a Sunday. However, it's a new year. People had plenty of months and months, and even more months now, because we don't know when the season will actually start, to really scheme, game plan, and figure this thing out. So, of course, being the smart head coach John Harbaugh is, he's aware and is not going to live in the super limelight of just almost getting there or having a really excellent season, because just like every good program, every good organization, every good football team, once you become good and you become established, people will no longer sleep on you, and that is a fact. Brice, is anyone sleeping on the Ravens this season? Yes or no?
No, not at all, man. You can't sleep on them. They were the number one seed in the AFC last year. They have an MVP. You legitimately cannot sleep on that. And, the thing is, man, listen, you usually have a team every year this happens. The Ravens were the team last year. And I think with the Ravens' talent, we expect them to still be just as good, even though they have a bullseye on their back. Obviously, we have to see about the development of Lamar Jackson and how the rest of the team does, and if they can still be as good as they were last year. But for the most part, I feel like everything is put into place for them to still be very successful this season and make another playoff run and hopefully, be able to get over some demons. Because right now, regular season, Ravens are one of the best teams. Playoffs the last 2 years, the first game they played, eliminated. They have to get over the hump. They have to win that playoff game, or else people are going to start bringing up, okay, Lamar Jackson can dominate in the regular season, but he can't win in the playoffs. He's not a playoff quarterback. You know that people are going to be ready to tweet that if he lost another playoff game this year. So I feel like, overall, with everybody looking at Baltimore to see how good they're going to be, to see how Lamar is going to improve, to see the direction of this franchise moving forward, listen, they have Super Bowl aspirations up there, as they should, because they are one of the teams, talent-wise, that can go head-to-head with maybe who we consider, or a lot of people consider the best team in the AFC, the Kansas City Chiefs. And both of these offenses can light it up. So if we get what people would probably want, which is Chiefs and Ravens in the AFC Championship game, I'm sure people will want to be a fireworks show and two young up-and-coming, basically next face of the next generation of quarterback QBs going at it and, just having a great game and just giving us all-time stuff. But, I think ultimately overall, Baltimore right now is just, they got to keep the course. John Harbaugh has proven that he is one of the best coaches in the league. And he's one of the few guys who was a special teams coach, and now he's been head coach of the Ravens for almost like a decade now. So he's definitely done his part, and I believe that success will continue this year and into further years in the future.
And you know what? The real interesting thing about it to me is that in football, it's a bit different. Because sometimes when we look at the regular season in other sports like baseball, like NBA more specifically, when we see things in the NBA in the regular season, we're like, oh, it's the regular season. Playoffs will be much different. In reality, playoffs are much different in the NBA than they are in the NFL. And you can't take what you see in the regular season, no matter how much you think it matters besides seeding, like everything else besides seeding in the regular season for the NBA can sometimes be just thrown out the window because teams will be different on the regular NBA season. You can't just focus in on one team like you can in the playoffs and really scheme against them and figure out their weaknesses. And you have to kind of go week to week and you got to just do your best and install your offense. In the NFL, it's different. They spend, of course, each week game planning against one another all the time. So I say this to make it seem like it's not like they've been exposed, right? The Ravens offense has not been exposed. We don't know the weaknesses per se that are so hurtful that will be their kryptonite. Like, we don't know their kryptonite. Last year in the playoffs when they went up against, Derrick Henry and the running backs, they weren't exposed. They just didn't play well. They had a really rough first half, and their second half they couldn't get anything going. But you can't argue. Honestly, if you play that game 10 times, I think the Ravens come out of it probably 7 out of the 10. And there's a lot of drop balls, there's a lot of passes that didn't connect to where they needed to go, and it was just a all around offensive poor performance from the Ravens. But that doesn't mean that they broke them, that they figured out the cheat code. This isn't rocket science here. Like, the Ravens went 15-1. Am I correct?
Exactly.
They went 15-1. They won that many games in the regular season. That is difficult in of itself to do in the NFL. It's not easy.
And so they're definitely going to be a team that you have to keep an eye on this year because obviously we don't think they're going to go 15-1 again. But going 13-3, 12-4 is still just as good. And that should be potentially in the division good enough to win the AFC North again, which is considered one of the toughest, if not the toughest division in football. And probably will get them a higher seed, which again, as we remember, since the playoff seeding has changed, if you get a 2 seed, that's not a bye week. You have to get 1 to get a bye. So now you have even more stakes. So that means I'm sure you're going to have teams, even if they're a game within the 2nd seed, you'll see them play week 17. And, Baltimore's always going to go out there every week, and they're going to give it their all the time because they know And again, Lamar still has that chip on his shoulder. He still has to prove the haters wrong. And that's going to be what I think is going to be one of the key driving forces in how Baltimore does during this next current season.
Yeah, they do have to, and he has to keep that edge because he has to keep improving on himself because this last MVP season was great and it was fine, but you have to keep improving to be better, especially when you're that young. You can't think that you have it all in a bag of chips. Like, he doesn't. There were times where he struggled. There were times where he was inconsistent. And even though he is magic out there on the field, when he does do what he's best at, improving at the weaker parts of his game, that's what all football is about, is improving on your weaknesses to be able to really, really bring it all for your team whenever they need it, right? It's just like Russell Wilson came in the league and he wasn't the best. You know, his defense carried him for a long time until it was time for him to really, really step up and learn how to be an NFL quarterback for real. And he really, really, really found himself in that and has become basically Seattle's version of Drew Brees, in my opinion, to where he's so good that he just makes up for so many of that team's deficiencies. And I'm not saying that the Baltimore Ravens are in similar status on team composition, but it's a similar mindset. You have to improve to be able to do what you need to do for your team at all costs. But with that said, we're going to take another break here, and we're going to come back in talking about the third team that we want to really discuss more than others. So we talked about the Steelers beforehand, and now we're going to get into the Bengals, and that's coming up.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Okay, so for our last topic on this division, so to speak, we've been kind of breaking a little bit down every 2 weeks or so. We have decided to go and talk about the Cincinnati Bengals as far as a whole on their team concept, because a lot of things have changed. You know, they've went and got guys in free agency like Von Bell from the Saints, who was one of their more integral parts of their defensive back depth. That personally, as a Saints fan, I'm sad to see him go, but he had to go get his money, he had to go get paid. And we all can understand that. So, offensively last year, Cincinnati was not the greatest. And the year before, they were not the best either, but they definitely went down the toilet, not only because of, possibly tanking, but, Andy Dalton just wasn't getting it done there at the end of the day. And now they've moved on. They do not have Andy Dalton anymore, and they went and got the first overall pick in Mr. Joe Burrow, and he is going to be the foreseeable face of the franchise for the Cincinnati Bengals. And for context, we're on Football Outsiders right here and using some of their DVOA stats and things like that. So their offensive rank last year was 29th out of 32. That is pretty bad. They were 19th last year. So they've dropped 10 whole spots 2 years apart. It's understandable because not only was their offense bad, but their defense was probably equally worse or equally as bad. You can't be equally worse than something, I suppose. But their weighted offense was 27th. So they didn't change much. And that's to be expected when you're a bad team that is trying to secure a quality draft pick. But there's been a lot of changes now. Of course, they have A.J. Green coming back. They still have Tyler Boyd. They have some draft picks that they went and acquired, like T. Higgins. And they also have Joe Mixon. Can't forget about that. And some offensive line picks. They are trying to stack the Jenga box. Brice, how long are we going to wait before we start to think, are they going to try and make a sneaky run at being a better team than people expect? Or maybe are we just a little still too starstruck and we probably should taper our expectations?
Well, Cincinnati is one of those teams that, they just happen to have some things not going well for them right now. Like I said, they're in the toughest division in football. So, realistically, everybody expects them to be fourth. So usually if you're fourth in the division, that means you have, if it's a good year, maybe 7-9. If Bengals with 7-9, I don't think anybody looks at it as a bad year. It's better than last year, but that's just, it really depends. They have, like I said, the thing about Cincinnati is they have offensive skill players. That is one thing they do have. Like you said, AJ, Tyler Boyd, Joe Mixon, T. Higgins, last year's first round pick, I think his name was Jonah Williams, I believe. He didn't play off last year for the Cincinnati Bengals. I think he's going to be a tough tackle. He's coming back this year. So they're going to equip their offensive line and hopefully protect Joe Burrow. Because against these defensive lines they're going to have to go against in the AFC North, and just in whoever they play on their schedule, it's going to be tough. So, the Bengals really are in a spot in a position where they, right now, literally, if they can get more wins than last year, then they're moving in the right direction. Because you expect them to be better than last year. Now, we still have, the jury is still out on Zach Taylor, head coach. We don't even know if he's a good head coach. Because sometimes you put a coach that is freshly new to the head coaching scene on a bad team, you don't know if they suck at coaching or they just the team is so bad they can't do anything with it. So obviously, since he's shaping this team more into his vision, we get to see potentially how that looks, how good they look, et cetera, because he is a guy, he's an offensive guy. So obviously he's going to be the guy that people say, listen, we need you to take Joe and make him what we drafted him to be, which is a franchise quarterback. Because you know how this goes, Ethan, with quarterbacks and head coaches. When you're tied to him, if he fails, you fail. There is no saving grace unless potentially, let's say Joe Burrow had a great year this year, then the sophomore year he had a bad year, and they fired Zach Taylor. Well, you might give Joe Burrow that third year just because, okay, we have one good, one bad. We don't know which one you are consistently yet. But in terms of the situation,
the Trubisky effect,
exactly. And so but if Burrow struggled for 2-3 years, then you could be like, okay, well, if we get rid of him, we're getting rid of Burrow as well, or we don't feel like it's not good enough, or maybe we got to change things up. And we just got to really see. I think Cincinnati, like I said, they're going to be a very interesting team to watch. Because like they say, not every interesting team is a winning team. There are some very interesting and entertaining losing teams. I believe Arizona was probably the most entertaining losing team last year. I think Cincinnati has the chance to be the most entertaining losing team this year.
And, I think Cincinnati is in a state of, it really depends on what the owner thinks they are in, right? So there's different stages football teams can go into. Last year, clearly, they were in a rebuilding phase, and which means they were going to lose a lot, and they were going to try and get into position to have a good draft pick. Now, unless they believe they still are in rebuilding, which I don't think they are in anymore, they've built a quality foundation within themselves. So the only thing that you can possibly say right now is development time. They have to develop Joe Burrow into an NFL-level quarterback, and that can take some time. And I'm speaking on this on Zach Taylor's behalf because I think that, coaches do deserve a little bit more time than they normally are given when it comes to developing certain players and especially certain positions. If Zach Taylor can't develop Joe Burrow next year, at least to a 6-10 record, it's very possible, and if it looks bad, it's very possible that Zach Taylor loses his job because it's happened before. We've seen it a lot over the course of NFL's past in the past few decades, that coaches don't get a lot of time. And sometimes they get the boot faster than you would like to see. But people want results, especially when they get first-round picks. As popular as Joe Burrow, they want to see results. And they want to see it quickly and swiftly. And, you know, they're in a developmental phase right now. And then you need to see if they can get into a competitive fire. But we've been fooled before, right? We've been fooled by certain things. We've seen flashes from guys who are like, oh, this might be the one. He may have something here, and then it ends up being nothing. So you can't always just be fooled by maybe the good year. So I think they need to take baby steps with this whole thing, because to be honest, their division is ultimately very talented. And I'm not usually one to say you need to wait out the studs in the division, but Cleveland hasn't shown it can get itself together, right? We haven't seen Cleveland get it together. We know what the Ravens are capable of, and we know that the Steelers are always in the mix until Big Ben goes and rises into the sunset, right? Now, I'm not saying they need to wait for the Steelers to go ride into the sunset, because the Steelers are pretty much a quality organization that knows how to rebuild without basically rebuilding all the time. They find a way to change their identities and things like that. But the one thing that's very hard to do is to get a new quarterback in there that knows what he wants to do and can be your guy for years to come. Once Big Ben is gone, the Steelers are in quarterback flux unless something drastic changes. That would be the time for the Bengals. That'll give enough time for the Bengals to really figure out their identities, and if Joe Burrow is the one, and if he is, for him to develop good enough to go out there and really win consistently in the division. Because if you can't take care of the division, you're not going to win anywhere.
Yeah, man. And, you just got, really, man, what you do with Team Cincinnati is, like you said, it's a development. You gotta have things that you can take in the next year and say, what worked for us, what didn't? Did Burrow make progress? Were we still able to keep a running game? How were we in the passing game? Was our offensive line able to protect? Could we get pass rush? Where were weaknesses and strengths? So then next year you can potentially make that next jump as you try to figure out and cover the holes of the team that have been presented from this past year. Because like I said, the best thing for the Bengals is to show us that they're better than maybe how people and analysts expect them to be. And then when they go out on the field, show us, oh, they're a tough team to play. It's not an easy W. You got to really go in there or they will beat you. Because if you have that gains respect around the league. And, listen, right now, a lot of people look at the Bengals as the doormat of the AFC. And if they can get that respect and not become the doormat anymore, that's going to help them go a long way.
All right. So we're going to take another break, and we're going to come back and talk more about some NFL topics.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
In sports, there's always things about money and cost to run facilities, to make things go, to advertise, to feed people in stadiums, to bring people in stadiums, marketing, all that jazz. But the biggest thing that people pay attention to when it comes to money is contracts and contract extensions and signings and transactions, the whole 9 yards. And the NFL is one of the bigger properties among sports where you're glued into the latest signing, the latest transaction all the time. When we look at guys, primarily, right, Brice, we see quarterbacks start their conversations early because unlike other skill positions, you have to know when it's time to secure your quarterback, because if you are uncertain, you find yourself in weird negotiation processes that either because he outplayed the current contract that he's on, and to be honest, no one expected him to be that good enough to warrant more money, but at the same time, people don't think that he's worth the money that he would be warranted to get, aka Dak Prescott. But in this case, someone like Deshaun Watson, who has been toting around the nickname the football Michael Jordan for a few years, is somewhat of a superhero of Houston when it comes to football, that is. He thinks he's optimistic, or he says he's optimistic for an eventual extension with the Texans. But let's not forget, the Texans have infamous head coach Bill O'Brien, who very possibly could be working against the efforts of the Houston Texans. Brice, what have you seen over the past few months, even the past few years, that have really either aided to or even been a detriment to the Houston Texans and possibly could hurt the chances of getting Deshaun Watson to really re-sign, especially early?
Well, I mean, one of the main things is just the talent on the team and the reduction on the field. I mean, listen, they traded DeAndre Hopkins. We don't know how good David Johnson's going to be. We don't know how good his team's going to be. If Houston has a bad year, first, you know what Bill O'Brien's going to do if he kept his job. He's going to say, well, Deshaun, we went 5-11, so I don't know if we need to pay you this much money. And then there's going to be a beef. And then he's going to want to get traded, or he wants to leave. And it's just going to be like, Bill O'Brien, you are going to literally run out every star you ever had in this league on your team. And that's just one scenario. Obviously, it depends on the respect. Do they show respect to Deshaun Watson? Do they show Deshaun, we want you as our quarterback? If they're hesitant, if they are hesitant to give him a deal, that could create trust issues. You're seeing them back. Dallas has been hesitant. Dak saw it. He's like, all right, y'all gonna be hesitant. You gotta pay me more now, because he's like, you give me the firm commitment, or I might not even play for you guys. Now we don't know how serious Dak is about potentially not playing for the Cowboys, but that's just obviously a second scenario. And with both of those scenarios, it really just comes down to, like you said, Bill O'Brien. Because he really could mess this up. And I just don't think you can in this situation. Because you didn't pay DeAndre. J.J. Watt said he wasn't going to take an extension this year because he wants to prove himself. So what if J.J. Watt has a 15, 16 sack year? He's a free agent next year. You got to pay him too. So what are you going to do here? Like, you got to pay J.J., even though he's older, so you could see him walk. And then his season might make him be able to walk. But then if y'all let JJ walk and it's still not an instant signing to Deshaun Watson, it's just like, is there any player you're comfortable paying? And so I think it's just one of those things where they have to be very careful. Listen, Deshaun has a lot of people in his ear on Twitter saying, you need to leave. They don't respect you. They don't care. They don't appreciate you. And Deshaun's doing his due diligence. He's like, listen, I get everybody what they're saying. I played here for all my career so far. I love the city of Houston. I want to win here. So unless they do something to me directly that disrespects me, I'm willing to overlook the other. And we'll see how far that takes him and their relationship and the contract negotiations into the future.
This is for sure the topic of conversation, because you got to look at it like this, right? This is the put up or shut up time for Houston's front office and not really their offense or their team per se. Now, they should be one of the best, because they should be one of the best teams at this point in the AFC. They have one of the better quarterbacks in the league. They have, at a point in time, they've had one of the best wide receiver products in the NFL. They traded him away. And, their offense is very much wishy-washy. It's up and down at times, a lot of injuries across the board at the wide receiver position. Tight end is kind of scarce on their side of the ball. And we all know about J.J. Watt. When he plays, he's great. But when he's not out there, it's hard to replace what he does on the defensive side of the ball. It was at points to where we got to remember Houston was at a point to where they were putting J.J. Watt in his prime out at tight end at times. Like, we can't forget that this is probably one of the better times Houston's been around, because they did have the Matt Schaub era. Of course, we know this. We are all aware of that. We know about the Andre Johnson stuff. We know this. But let's not pretend that this has not been a good stretch of Houston football as far as being able to make it somewhere is concerned, if you know what I'm saying. So, in order to continue that, they have to keep the guy who's doing it happy. And it's not Bill O'Brien, per se. It's Deshaun. They lucked into getting Deshaun Watson, right? Deshaun Watson, in a redraft today, he's probably going number 2 overall. Or depending on the draft position, where he's the second quarterback off the board. And that's without a doubt, right? So, you gotta make him happy. And we don't know, really, unless behind closed doors he's mentioning it, if he is happy with the trade of his best wide receiver and bringing in Brandon Cooks and bringing in, David Johnson. And I'm not saying he's going to not like the guys they brought in. Of course, they're going to find a way to get together and win, because winning is the priority here. But it doesn't look like Bill O'Brien, being the president of football operations, is really working out as of yet. And a lot of people are criticizing a lot of his moves. Now, we also saw a lot of criticism come from guys about certain moves like John Gruden. And I'd argue that a lot of people have come off of John Gruden of recent years because it looks like he did what was necessary for his team. And at the time, it looked really bad and it looked foolish. But I'd say the Raiders are probably in a better position to win now than they had been if they had kept, Khalil Mack. So, you kind of have to give people the benefit of the doubt. So right now, I'm like, okay, Bill O'Brien, we'll see how this last year, basically, of your tenure is going to be. Especially, it's going to be either his last year as being the president of football operations, right? Doing that thing, being the GM, so to speak. Or he's just going to get fired. Because if they do okay, I think they're taking the GM tokens from him. They're taking that away. No matter what happens. I think they're taking it away.
Yeah, definitely. Listen, everybody's going to be waiting for it. But Houston fans, everybody, they want him completely gone. And honestly, if players even start to come out and say, I don't think he's it. I mean, listen, the owner of the Houston Texans has a decision to make, because it feels like everybody's against this man. And if you hang on to him and this team doesn't do great things in the future, it's going to make him look like, what are you doing? Like, everybody sees this man is breaking down the organization, so why don't you get rid of him? Now, we have to credit Bill O'Brien. He helped Houston become consistently good. Houston's never been consistently good their entire franchise, which they've only been in existence for almost 2 decades now. So, he's done that. But at the same time, you're also seeing, okay, now there's a ceiling that seems like has been hit here. And you're seeing how he operates. And now it's just like, okay, maybe we need to go somewhere else with a new guy at the helm potentially if things don't work out this season with Houston, especially after some of the moves that he's made.
Right. Well, we're going to take another break, and then coming out, we're going to be talking about what seems to be the biggest conversation going on, not just in the U.S., but the entire world.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
almost like it was a perfect storm of events over the past week. Many American citizens have been in constant protest to vandalism and looting, in anger, aggression, madness, sadness, anger. I said anger already. Just frustration due to the current state of police brutality in the United States. It has not just touched the U.S. It has been something that the whole world has seen enough of, to where you'll see people standing in solidarity with the protesters in their own different countries around the world. And of course, everyone has to have a response at this point. Everyone has to be, because the video is so graphic, right? The video is so graphic. There's no right in that video. There's no other way to look at it. And if you are trying to look at the other way, you probably should reconsider the values that you live by. But of course, this does not also lead to its own sense of nuance, because we've seen how people act about this sort of thing before. The NFL used to have a quarterback that used to play for the 49ers a little while ago, until many people thought was blackballed out of the NFL for his stance on police brutality, for his statements during the pregame where he would kneel, as in Colin Kaepernick, and many other players who still continue to kneel, and those who did kneel and were then also blackballed out of the league for speaking up and using their platform in order to raise awareness and to make people really consider what's happening out here. The NFL and Roger Goodell specifically put out this statement saying, "The NFL family is greatly saddened by the tragic events across our country. The protesters' reactions for these incidents reflect the pain, anger, and frustration that so many of us feel. Our deepest condolences go out to the family of Mr. George Floyd and to those who have lost loved ones, including the families of Miss Breonna Taylor in Louisville and Mr. Ahmaud Arbery, the cousin of Tracy Walker of the Detroit Lions. As current events dramatically underscore, there remains much more to do as a country and as a league. These tragedies inform the NFL's commitment and our ongoing efforts. There remains an urgent need for action. We recognize the power of our platform and communities, and as part of the fabric of American society, we embrace that responsibility and are committed to continuing the important work to address these systematic issues together with our players, clubs, and partners." That is from Roger Goodell. And let me tell you, Brice, a lot of the players were not happy about this quote. And in layman's terms, people are saying it's cap. And there's a lot of players responding to this. So Texans wide receiver Kenny Stills, who we just finished talking about the Texans, he tweeted, "Save the BS." He used a longer form of that phrase, as Stills was one of the few players that used to kneel, or he still kneels on the sideline. He was very prominent in kneeling when he played for the Dolphins against the national anthem in protest for racial injustice. There have been more quotes. "Shame on you. This is beyond hollow, plus disingenuous. This is a lie. Your actions show who you are," said director Ava DuVernay. "You've done nothing but the exact opposite of what you describe here. Keep Floyd's name out of your mouth. Shame on you." Plus, the consultants of this travesty of an organization. Another quote coming from Michael Sean Dugar from The Athletic. "Colin Kaepernick asked the NFL to care about the lives of black people, and they banned him from their platform." There have been many other more quotes going out there, and honestly, it's not looking good for the NFL. There's nothing the NFL can do at this moment in time, in my opinion, that is going to make people think any different of them, because they never tried in the beginning. So it's going to look like they make a statement. They may make players go out and clean up the streets, which is a whole nother topic of conversation. If players should feel obligated to do that. And Brice, I just want to hear what you think. What do you think the NFL is going to, what they should do, what they might do? How do they navigate in this sort of political nightmare that they've basically brought upon themselves?
Well, like you said, it's a political nightmare that they brought upon themselves, which is a very accurate statement. I mean, listen, they had a chance when Colin did what he did to band behind that movement. So then when if this is such a situation has happened now, people could sit here and say, the NFL supports the movement that's going on right now in this country. But because of what they did, and now them trying to come back now and say, oh, we understand what's going on. We're here to support. We don't think those, this is the right thing for the country. And I'm glad people are taking protests. Like, all that to the players is bull. Because it's like literally when we were taking knees, not even violence, just knees, that was an issue. And it got one man out of the league and he can't even get another job. But yet you say this and expect us to just now think, yeah, the NFL is ready to now support the African American community and the Black Lives Matter movement or any movement that is for the righteous cause. That you just can't do that if you're the NFL. You have to do a lot to really prove yourself to the player and the people, because they are very skeptical and they question what you're doing. But it's interesting because I don't know if you ever saw Richard Sherman's tweet, but Richard Sherman made a tweet saying he's very impressed about how all the white QBs in the league have spoke out. Because obviously, since they are white, the fact that they're speaking out against it, and then a lot of them are, of course, if you're Richard Sherman, you're like, okay, so they clearly understand. But when you got the top owners, the commissioner, barely saying anything, they released the league statement. It wasn't Roger Goodell. It wasn't necessarily, because I'm sure they had multiple people in that statement trying to decide what they wanted to say. It wasn't, other owners, even though you'll hear an owner here or there drop a statement. It was a collaborative effort when they dropped the statement to say, okay, we see what's going on. We'll do whatever we can to help and support. But the players just feel like when we try to create a movement within the league itself, y'all could not give us the same energy. Y'all could not give us the same treatment. And you know what you said earlier? You said it was cap. It is cap. Because it is absolute cap. I'm talking the blue cap, red cap, every cap. That's how cap it is. So, like I said, the NFL, they have a lot they need to do to show that they really are supportive. And they need to, and it may be impossible for them at this point, but they need to at least try to make up for the mistakes they made in the past when a similar movement like this happened with Colin Kaepernick.
Right, and let's not forget, just a few weeks ago they were talking about basically extending more parts of the Rooney Rule and having draft pick compensation just for having black coaches and things like that. And of course, we're running close to another break, but we're going to come back with the same sort of topics. But just to quickly wrap that part up, let's not forget about that. Let's not forget that they just said, "Oh, we'll give you a 3rd round pick because you have a black coach." And it just never felt genuine. It feels like a slap in the face. Right? It just feels like, oh, just because you took a black coach, it's not the right coach. Just because you took a black coach, you get a gift. You get an interesting pick, a 3rd rounder. It's just a lot of things like that where it seems like the NFL is kind of tone deaf on a lot of stuff. But hold on, we're going to take a break and we're going to come back with it.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Okay, so coming back, we were just talking about, of course, all the protests, the riots, the looting, all for police brutality towards the African American community, towards black people, towards people of color. It's not just about George Floyd. It's not just about Breonna Taylor. It's about everything that's really transpired over the past couple decades, many decades of injustice in the judicial system, in the state legislators, in the laws, in how police treat minorities around the United States, and specifically about African Americans. And we were just talking about, before we went to break, how the NFL really doesn't seem to get it. And maybe it is that they do get it. Maybe they see it, but they don't care. They don't care to a certain extent. They care about the dollars, because I guarantee you, when people see these athletes speak up against their own people that they work for, against their bosses, so to speak, that will speak volume. That will see, oh, my favorite player on my favorite team doesn't believe that his employer is being truthful or is being honest about how they conduct things. Or we saw reports from former NFL executives about the truth, really, that they definitely did blackball Colin Kaepernick out of the league because of his kneeling and things like that. It only makes perfect sense to see the reactions that's coming out in the news, coming out on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. These people, you can't silence these people anymore. People are tired. And it wouldn't surprise me, like, when they took Colin Kaepernick out the league, so to speak, with all the kneeling and all the protests, people were alluding to the idea of boycotting the NFL. It didn't really work, of course. A lot of people still watch the NFL. Some may still be boycotting. But I guarantee you now, if it's brought up, it may have a lot more traction, especially after a very tone-deaf statement from Roger Goodell, than it ever would be. If there was any time to suggest that people are going to start boycotting the NFL because they just haven't been able to do it right, this would probably be the time. Wouldn't you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if people are truly fed up with it, like you said, this would be the time to start boycotting the league. I mean, listen, one thing that people have made an argument about during this whole process is that, you know, people are talking about all the vandalizing and looting that's been going on. But they also made mention of, think about when the team wins a Super Bowl, how fans go crazy and it seems like they, in a way, destroy their own city or do damage to the city. And how that's praised. But what's happening now is not being praised. And, you know, you have people who will literally sit here and die for football, you know? And yet what people want from the movement, what, you know, people want is the same energy to protect our citizens from corruption and within the police force and across our leaders around the nation and country. And so the NFL, again, is a big company, big league. They have the power to really make an impact if they decided to put their resources into the right thing. It's kind of a shame in a way, because it feels like the players are having to be that. They're having to carry it because the actual league itself doesn't want to do nothing but the bare minimum. And I can understand, with that being known, frustration again from the players, frustration from fans, from people. Because listen, these leagues are under the same scrutiny as the president, of the government, as the police forces. Because if they they could start. They start making change. Then other groups might start making change, and it could be a widespread. But no one's willing to actually make that first move and that first step forward in that. I mean, listen, you already know how players have felt about Roger Goodell in general, and you know, obviously the relationship between him and the players has not been great. Fans boo him. I mean, you know, and it seems like just within the office in the realm of the NFL offices, it's not the greatest place from the outside person in terms of looking in on it. But if you think about the NBA, we haven't, I mean, unless I haven't seen anything, Ethan, and I don't know if you have, but if you look at the NBA, yes, they have their thing going on trying to get the lead back. But at the same time, you know, LeBron's out here being active and they're vocal. You know, all these players are being active and vocal. All the retired players, before players, are being active and vocal. We obviously know
Jaylen Brown drove 15 hours in a day to go protest in Atlanta.
Exactly. So they're making such a consistent and conscious effort. I saw Ernest Cannon. He was out in Boston making an effort. Remember, he's from Turkey. He has his own issues with the Turkey government. But he's still out here in the protest with us. You know what I'm saying? Like they can impact. And that's what we want to happen. It's just in any league, in any sport, in any company, in anything. Just that effort and impact that you're seeing those players make and the sacrifices they're willing to take. Because they're putting their lives out there on the line when they go out there and protest, potentially being involved in scuffles. Just for us, just for the movement, just for everybody. So it's really a crazy, but also very defining situation right now.
And it all boils down to what Adam Silver has allowed and what Roger Goodell and the owners haven't allowed in the NFL. Roger Goodell has not given the players a proper sense of their own voice. The players have to always be under the idea that the shield is more important than any viewpoint, any values that they have as people. That was made very clear when in the heyday of, you know, Colin Kaepernick, Eric Reed. Of course, we see guys who's still in the league, like Kenny Stills, who still kneel, but they basically said no. They nipped it in the bud, and they basically got bullied by the President of the United States, who called people who were kneeling SOBs. And he won. The president won because the NFL didn't do anything to help to support the players that play for their game, that bring in their money revenue, their dollars. The players that represent a mass majority of the community that are out there protesting every day for the past week about all of this. They are not being fairly represented because the voices that are in the league have not been able to be fully vocalized outside of a very, very kind of weak Twitter post thing where you make a statement on Twitter and the fans eat it up. Sure, that happens. It does. Everybody does it. Every single corporation has had their own message to say they stand with the protest. But we'll see when it comes to game time this season, right? We'll see. Because I'm sure plenty of people are going to be taking knees during games. I'm sure it's going to happen. And we're going to see how people feel about it. We're going to see, again, the same individuals making the same tired arguments about players kneeling and it's not being respectful to the national anthem and it doesn't bring out any cause. It's not the time to protest. And now we're seeing people protesting now and they're saying this is not the right way. You know, they're telling people how to express their frustration with their own country. And that's just not how America was ever created. America was created due to riots and protests. How hypocritical can you be? Like, really? So that's it. You got a minute, Brice. Take us out of here.
No. I mean, yeah, man. As you can tell, you can hear the passion in our voices talking about this subject as we see what's going on. We see what needs to be changed. We see what needs to be fixed. We see everything, you know, that's going on. And then some. And as we both know, a lot of changes have to be made to the system. A lot of changes have to be made to just how we are as a country and a nation. And so, and it's going to take each and every one of us to create that change. And it's up to people who didn't have more platform for change to use their platform to also help in that movement with us as well. And eventually, if all that works out, then maybe we can all get to a point of a true sense of peace, even though that may be something that may be even past our lifetimes and et cetera, and other our children's lifetimes. But it's something that we just have to keep working forward to now and hope for progressions into the future.
Well said, Brice. Well, that's going to wrap it up for the GSMC football podcast for today. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in and listening to us, keeping us with the network. You'll feel all the football news on the GSMC via social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You know what it is. We'll be back here next week to talk all things football and football related. For Brice, this is Ethan and the GSMC. See you all next week.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.